Welcome to the Opt-in Podcast. I am your host, Melissa Franks, and this week we are talking about your personal behavior and how, when it happens in public, it can potentially impact either your business or your employment at another company. This is going to be a really interesting topic for us to talk about today because often we don't spend enough time in business discussing how everything is interconnected. I have a story for you that I'm going to share kind of at the top, and then we're going to go through a few things. One of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today is because it's timely. And the reason that it's timely is there's a significant amount of emotion in the social media space right now, in the public forum. And there's a lot of dialogue around appropriate use of social media when you are employed by somebody or own your own business. And I'm not going to dance into ideology or the political spectrum today. I do want to talk, though, about very specific things that you may not be aware of and or that you should consider as you are spending time in the public forum. So I want to kind of set the stage a little bit for you because we had such an interesting weekend this weekend. This past weekend, one of my children was at a baseball tournament, and we were out of state specifically, and they were very excited to go to this venue because it was a kids' playland. Baseball was a side effect, and you could tell because they lost their first two games miserably. It was a little bit embarrassing. We as parents, though, knew that really they were there to hang out and have fun and do all the things. And so, our hopes weren't set super high. So the second day, we all had a very long ride ahead of us. We had the earliest game of the day. And if you have ever been to youth sports, you know you're up real early and you were up late the night before. So everybody's a little tired. And we were in the consolation game, which meant that no matter what happened, we were all going home. Both teams. Nobody was advancing. This was basically because the tournament said you get to play 3 games when you're here. This was our third game. And we noticed really early on that the other team only had 9 players. Now, if you're not familiar with baseball, usually there's 11 to 13 that are hanging around so that they're substitutes and some other things. So it was a little bit weird that they were at a tournament at the second day with only 9 players. And we were evenly matched. It was great news. We were actually playing pretty well compared to the 2 days before, and we were winning by a small margin, like 1 point, 1 run. Nothing too crazy. And all of a sudden, the coaching staff for the other team really got upset. They got upset with the umpires, they got upset with our players, and what resulted was that the coach was ejected. And when you're ejected from a baseball game, it means you actually have to leave the facility. You can't stay at all. And as that was happening, some of the parents on the other team got super loud. And they were yelling at the umpires, and they were starting to yell at other parents on our team. And the tournament director had to come over and try to calm everybody down. And then about 10 minutes later, a child, because these are children, was up to bat and he struck out, and he was mad. And he looked right at our pitcher, who made a gesture. He kind of sheathed a sword, if you know what kids do in sports. Was it appropriate? No. Was it against rules? No. He was kind of baiting him a little bit. So the batter very loudly yelled a very profane statement, and he was ejected, which then also meant that they had 8 players, so they didn't have enough kids to play the game anymore. And the crowd erupted. The parents were screaming on the other team. One of the moms on our side was like, hey, don't talk to my kid that way, because she was yelling at the kid. So the moms started yelling at each other. Our mom was, just basically saying, leave my kid alone, and she was quite calm. And then another spectator on their side started using homophobic slurs at these children. And eventually everything calmed down. We won the game. And as this was happening, there were long pauses in the game. And one of the times that the children came out. Our kids were riled up. They're 14 years old, like, testosterone and all the things. And I had to look at them and say, hey guys, like, we all have to go into the same parking lot together at the end of the day. And obviously these people are pretty angry. So what we don't want to do is throw gasoline on the fire. We want to show up professionally. We want to do our job. We want to have good sportsmanship. We want to set the example. And we want to move along. And that's what happens in professional settings all of the time, right? We see bad behavior and we get to make a decision. Do we behave that way in kind, or do we behave in the way that we know that we should? So as we were sitting there kind of watching things go on, one of the things that we did is we looked up this other team. Like, where are they from? What's the organization like? And we found them, and then we found who had founded the organization. And as we were talking, a parent turned to me and said, you should write an email to them because they probably want to know how their business is being represented out in the world. And there was just this moment where I thought, you're so right. You're so right. Because these are coaches that they hired. These are families that tried out and were selected for the team. And here they are behaving horribly in front of all of these people. We now have a bad impression of that organization. We now will not be playing against them anymore because we don't want to deal with this again. They could potentially be penalized and not be allowed to enroll in tournaments. It could be really damaging to the business. And it got me thinking that all of you, whether you work for somebody else or you run your own business, have people working for you. And you can't be everywhere by design. That's why there are people that are working for you. And what ends up happening is you lose line of sight to what their behavior looks like and how they're representing you when you are not there. Think about it. Employees all of the time go to trade shows and conferences. They're wearing company swag, like at a sporting event. One of the analogies that I love to use around this is that when people are driving like work trucks or work vans or whatever, and they make a really dumb move on the road, or they have a road rage incident or whatever, like, we know the business you're associated with. We can call them and complain. We can not do business with them in the future. And so some of these things, and I use this baseball example as a really good one, because you would never think, like, you're out of state, you're with your kids, you're at a baseball tournament, like all the things. This turned into I don't want to do business with them anymore because this is what they stand for. They may not, right? This may not be allowed at all. However, this was the representation to the public. And I want to dedicate this podcast today to talking about this. And this is why. What's happening out in the political landscape today, I don't even know to call it a political landscape, the human landscape today, is that there is a news cycle, that's all that I'm going to call it, that is highlighting people using their platforms, be it social media, be it their podcasts, be it their YouTube channels, be it their email lists, be it like whatever. And some of these people are private citizens that do not have a business. They work somewhere else to voice their opinions and to process emotions that they're having kind of real time. And what's happening is people are figuring out who that person is, where they work, and then calling for them to be terminated. And in some cases, they actually have. And so this conversation right now, today, is a very brief masterclass on all of the things that you need to consider if you own a business or you work in a business, and just some general guidelines for you to consider. I am not going to tell you what to do ever on this topic. This is a personal choice. I do think that there's a level of shock and awe that's happening right now that requires the conversation. So, to those of you that own businesses, when you are hiring people to work for you, as soon as you pay them $1, they are representing your brand. They are acting on behalf of you. And there is a very famous quote, I cannot remember who said it. It's that culture is what happens when you aren't watching as the business owner, right? When nobody's watching. That's the thing that actually happens. And all that culture is an embodiment of the core values of your business. So if you have very specific core values, I'm going to give you an example. One of mine is inclusivity. And you're interviewing people. You're testing to see if they're aligned with those core values, if they're going to represent them in all of their interactions with your internal team and anybody external. Here's where the ripple starts. So they may behave aligned with the core values inside of your business. They may behave with your end client or customer aligned with the core values. When they walk out the door, they are still affiliated with your business. Their LinkedIn profile says where they work. Maybe they've updated it in the Meta platform somewhere. They're people that know them personally, know where they're employed. And in the example of the baseball game, when behavior occurs that is misaligned to the core values of your business, it reflects on your business. Even if it's happening at something completely unrelated. If you sell software as a service and you've got some parent out at a baseball game and they've behaved badly, it's still going to be like, oh, I wonder why so-and-so company really wants to hire them. And that's why you, as the business owner, have a responsibility to be very clear on your expectations about embodying the core values of the business. Point number 2 is that you as the business owner have a responsibility to define policies and procedures that you want your employees to follow. When I was in corporate, social media really started to become a thing, right? And one of the things that came late to the party, but it eventually came, was a social media policy. And this thing was dense. It had so much legalese. It was very difficult to decipher. The bottom line is that the policy was created to protect the company. So it said things like, you cannot use any company devices to be on your personal social media. It said things like, you can use your social media to communicate anything but, and then it would list out specifically prohibited things for you to share. And it was all this fine print. And what would happen is that people would follow each other on social media because they knew each other at work and they were like, well, I want to know what they're up to on the weekend. Maybe they were friendly. Maybe they did happy, or I don't know why people follow each other on social media. I always had a policy that if we worked together, we didn't follow each other, but whatever. That was just me personally being very private. And what happened more than once was that there would be an anonymous report with screenshots from social media being concerned that an employee was violating the policies, was misaligned with the company mission and values. And because the policy was so specific, because it had been written by corporate lawyers who were on the payroll and could spend days and weeks going through this stuff, it was very easy for HR to evaluate if the policy had been broken and what actions to take. Now, I didn't ever see anybody terminated for a violation of the social media policy. I did see, though, many write-ups happen. I did see many reprimands happen. I did see complicated scenarios where when those reports would occur, then a counter report of harassment would occur, and it was a very messy situation. So you as the business owner, if you have not written down the rules around social platforms, around if you have employees in uniforms or branded items, around how they behave when they have those things with them, or they're wearing them, or they're operating in that mode, then you need to communicate them. You need to write them down. This is a protection mechanism for you as much as it's protecting the employee. There was a rule when I was in sorority forever and ever and ever ago, and these were stupid rules, right? But they all have the same point, which is exactly what I'm talking about. And when I was in a sorority, The rule was that you could not drink an alcoholic beverage out of a bottle or can. You had to use a glass. I told you it was a stupid rule. But the reason for it, what it was seated in, was that we had requirements related to etiquette and decorum, and that was a part of it. Now, it was antiquated and outdated, and we can argue about it all the time. And like the irony is that most of us actually prefer to use glassware. So nobody thought here nor there that what was underneath what seemed like a silly rule was the principle that in public settings, we behaved in a certain way. Now, that was a voluntary organization we all belonged in and blah, 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 but your employees are choosing to work with you. So in that stead, they're also saying, yes, I agree to show up in these forums when I'm representing the company in this way. So I would recommend that you have a social media policy. I would recommend that you have a policy about acceptable and unacceptable behavior in a uniform if you are a uniform business. I would recommend that if you are providing swag of any kind and you have specific core values that you want to communicate rules around, that you do so as well. And when I say swag, I mean like logoed polos, sweatshirts, hats, cups, mugs, Yetis, etc. Right? Anywhere where your logo, your company name has that information. It protects you and it protects the employee. Now, on the flip side, for those of you that are employees, I want to talk to you just quickly about this because this is where things get messy. When your company has a policy around all of those things that I listed, social media, swag, how to decorum, etc., you need to actually read it. You need to actually read it and you need to understand what the boundaries are, and you also need to understand if you're willing to operate within them. Here's what I mean. When I worked in corporate, and this wasn't written down, however, it became a thing, I understood the social media policy, and then I wanted to start this very podcast. And so I asked for permission and I was told no. And the reason that I was told no was because that was an endeavor that they saw as a conflict of interest with the business. Now, we can argue about it all day long, but in the end, I could not do this until I did not work there anymore because it was a violation of the policy. You would be surprised about the things that you're prohibited to do when you're employed by somebody else, because it's extensive. And when we get these massive employee handbooks and we don't read through them and we don't look at the rules, what happens is you end up violating something and everybody is watching. The issue with the world today, full stop, the issue with the world today is that nothing happens in private. Nothing. There was a report many, many years ago that an employee was drinking alcohol on the job. That report came in because there was a screenshot of a social media post with the person having alcohol in their hand on a weekday. That person was on vacation. So of course, it was a ridiculous report, but do you know how long it took us to investigate? Do you know how long it took for us to suss out and figure out that they didn't do anything wrong? And that employee felt harassed. That employee felt violated. And so I share that story specifically because I want you to understand, if you are working for somebody else, you need to know the rules. You need to understand what is defined and how you are expected to show up in the world. One of the recommendations that I give to all sorts of people all of the time is that if you have things that your company has given you, and I just use these examples, sweatshirts, hats, mugs, etc., you need to treat them when you use them or wear them as you are going to work. And if whatever you're about to do, say, represent, consume, etc., would not be allowed at work, it's not allowed with that stuff, period. So what's happening now? So what's happening now is that our world has become politically charged. That's not even the right word. It's like literally a powder keg that is exploding all over the place. And what's happening is people have become so accustomed to sharing their thoughts and opinions and processing emotions real time on social media that they're putting all sorts of things out into the world. And what's happening is that in kind, emotional reactions are coming back through and they're severe. And so there are now many people out there that you don't even know about waiting for you to say something that they can report to your employer to have a negative action happen to you. We are hearing stories of teachers getting terminated. Guess what? Teachers are state employees. Teachers have all sorts of rules and policies and procedures that they have to adhere to. So they will, if they violate a policy about talking about their personal opinion, if they're sitting in their classroom and they're recording a video and it's their personal opinion that becomes inflammatory and somebody finds it and reports them, you know what happens is they get fired. They get fired. It's happening all over the place with educators. It's happening all over the place with business professionals. It's happening on a daily basis. And the reason for that is because you, the person that's working, are not informed about what the rules are, and you're acting out of emotion and you're making incredible, risky decisions. So literally the entire purpose of this podcast is because I want you to understand that everything that you do is public domain. Everything that you say. And if you do not understand the requirements of your employer and you're acting out of emotion or lack of awareness, you're putting your entire livelihood at risk. Now, some of you, and I'm going to include myself in this forum here because I get asked this question a lot. Some of you understand what the rules are. Some of you understand how you are aligned to the core values and the mission of the business. And some of you choose to be loud and vocal because you've checked all of the boxes. And you do you, whatever your opinions are. If you spend any time with me on the internet, you would know that I have 5 core values, and that one of them is encourage bravery, and another one is foster inclusion, and another one is lead with joy, and I could go on and on and on. And these are how I operate. They're like literally the lifeline operating principles for everything I do. So of course they're the core values of the business because they're my core values all day, every day. Okay? And what that means is that when I am on my personal social media accounts, which are public, when I have an opinion, when I have information that I think is valuable, when a cause that I'm incredibly passionate about has something timely happen in current events, I will communicate about it. I will share information. There are only a few things specifically that I will provide my personal opinion about. 99% of what I share is information from other sources to keep people informed. And that, I think, is the fine line that people are missing. I often have people ask me, how are you brave enough to share information about X, Y, and Z? It could be a variety of things. It can be women's rights, trans rights, gun control, etc. And I'm quick to point out that what I'm doing is I'm fact checking and I'm sharing information that is truthful from a reputable source, and I believe other people need to be aware of. I don't, except for very specific isolated scenarios, opine. I do not vent. I do not process in real time. And the reason for that is because that's not the place to do that. Now, I said that I make a very specific carve out, and there are 2 reasons for that. One of them is that I am an incredibly impassioned advocate for domestic violence and family court reform. And I have lived experience there. So I will talk to you from my lived experience. I'm not sharing opinions. I'm sharing my lived experience. And very much the same way, we have had multiple active shooter situations in my immediate family. And so when I speak about that, I speak from our lived experience. And so this is my last tip for you. This is going to be a short and sweet one. If you choose to use your social platforms to ensure that the whole world knows what's important to you from a cause perspective, what is aligned with your core values, like if you choose to do all of those things, my recommendation to you is to share with the intention to educate and inform based on real information. I know that social media is a clickbait game, and I know that saying shocking things, voicing your opinion will get you clicks. It's going to get you likes. It's going to get things to go viral. When you are diving into a controversial or potentially polarizing situation, my recommendation to you, if you own a business or you work for somebody else, is that you share information with the intention to educate and inform. Save your personal opinions, save your venting, save your processing, save all of those things for your family and close friends. And I'm sharing this with you purely because I care that you continue to keep your voice and you continue to keep yourself employed and your business to run and all of those things. There is a way that you can do both. There is a way that you can be very clear about the causes that matter to you and your position on them without putting your job or your business at risk. And this is something that I have crafted over time, probably because I worked inside of a corporate structure that had me so handcuffed about what I could say and do publicly that I have a PhD in how to navigate this. So this podcast is just my call to action for all of you to really think about how you are showing up in the world and how it's reflecting on your business and employer and how your employees are showing up in the world. And if we need to have a quick conversation about how to get realigned. Because in the end, nobody wants to tank a business, and in the end, nobody wants to get fired. So this is where we all need to really work together, figure out what the rules of the road are, and then move forward from that direction. I promise you next week we will get back to all things business tips and tricks and all the stuff. But this one is really critical because this comes back to your personal brand. It comes back to what are you known for? How do you show up in the world? When people see you, what do they think of first? And unless you are a social media influencer by trade or you earn income from viral videos or any of those things, my guess is that you're really comfortable having people understand where you stand on very specific positions. You don't want them to think that you're the emotional person on the internet that comes on every time something happens and speaks their voice. So I hope this was helpful to you today. I know it's a little bit sideways, but this is so timely and it will last the test of time. This is something that you can come back and revisit again. This is something that you should really take notice of. And if you do nothing else, if you work for somebody else, go find your social media policy today, and make sure that you understand how you are allowed to show up in the world based on the policy before you post anything else. I hope you have a wonderful week and weekend whenever you are listening to this. And please know that you are wise and you are strong and you are capable, and I believe in you.